Good morning and welcome to the continuation of the teachings on the Rice Seedling Sutra. And thank you so much, Gen Rinpoche, for agreeing to continue with these precious teachings. So we'll begin with some preliminary prayers. You'll find a link for them in the chat box. So we'll go from there. To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one that's gone, the foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one God to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When I was supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With your body's form supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop, a dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the foe of false, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. refuge until I am awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh yeah, again, Dixon.
Oh yeah, I understand. Oh, ore ta kan shi so ba e ke na ta la na me ta wa ten je shi don ba ta la. Ya. Oh ta ga re su ka. Shi ne de ko ku lo de shi ta ma ta. Oh de da ne ta da ga ra shi to ba la ya. Ge yin sa ma ta ke ji sa ma. Ina ne je shi la ya. Shi da ba da ma bu yo ri do. Ka shi ka so. Sim jen li ya che ring ga shi ya. Oh, today you should have Sanjay Chumdente. Juden, you come to Sanjay Juden to come to Yaba Mambuko star on Sanjay in a Taranga to Sanjay Juden. I'm also here, Sanjay Sunga Noah, as our Rangam Sudan Lang. What that you can see. Mili Shabarsha. It turned out the Bashima. Distribute oh, Toshima to the Dabasha. I'm butcher to be there. Sindila Tobanashi, Toshimaya, to be Litin Kabashi. Adam me, Kabashi. Near Sola so. Your Nambala make you. It and all. Some Jay share $1 to me. Some Jay condition in it. So watch and you do young Geshe in there. Sort of sort of this. Oh, calling never change. You get some. Shall I swap? Number to should the Shavianek was showing what a new. Yeah, send dealer sub. You will make your home. Shall I swatch? The shop. Should I teach you? Window. What did you learn?
So here to begin with, paying homage first to the Buddha as the unsurpassed teacher for seeing and based upon his experience, teaching us dependent origination. So here at the beginning of a teaching, it's very important to set our motivation. And right now we should recognize that we have this kind of precious opportunity in the life that we have, but also having met with the teachings of the Buddha. So there are many different religious teachings and teachers, and there are some, for example, who might teach something that like harming animals is dharma, is the right kind of practice, who might teach harmful practices. But we have had the good fortune to meet with the Buddha's teachings. And the Buddha having come into the world is something that is incredibly rare. And although we didn't have the opportunity to actually meet the Buddha's teachings remain such that we have the ability to interact with them, to take them up into practice. And so right now, while we have this kind of life, a human life with all of the capability to practice the Dharma, and we have met with the Buddha's teachings, we should strive to make this meaningful, to use it for something that is meaningful. And so, at the very least, we should ensure that not just thinking about this life alone, but we have to take future lives. And so, to ensure that we gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, we make efforts towards not falling into the lower realms by recognizing first that whoever it is, other sentient beings have feelings. They aren't just like sort of dirt or stones or something, but other sentient beings feel pleasure and pain. And so, whoever it is, we should try not to harm them. If we are able to benefit them, that is good. But at the very least, we should avoid harming other sentient beings. And this, then, with the aim of gaining a good rebirth in the future, combined with the practice of purifying our negativities, not just the negativities that we committed in this life, but we have accumulated countless negative actions of killing and so forth in previous lives. And so making efforts to purify those kinds of negative actions and in turn accumulate positive actions through the practice of abandoning harm, this is the first level of motivation.
Yeah. 어디 가서 니리 나리아. 어딘데 삼르산에 교시망에 손을 쥐어 하다미 최주배 때 개버셔지. 이 시간에 소방기 있음. 진딜레 방법을 저 나만남서. 시간에 소망 붙여서 저 강가를 샤바체네. 삼리아 니리 메세나리아. 미기와 중간게 방법. 교와 줄랑간게 중계를 차서나. 이 제리아네. 다 하다 미 고바테야 예송라 되게 교 상부를 최주배 때도 로아래 교환에 교와 규디 하다 미 고바 최주배 때 개버셔지 또 아삼 이나야 때야 예송라 되게 된들 교와 임마도 그 동해지라 시지 과를 코라스도 레다 녀무베 샤와도 주네 이치 공부 놀래지 말라 라와메 받더라 네, 그것들은 코라바 시거라 도와. 코라 임베세. 내가 녀면 보왕게. 라라 라와메 바 풍분도 내체네. 동행 연구 받들래 땐도 타로시 제고요섬. 대체도네 같이 우리스네 대주대. 녀모레 되어라. 녀모 그왕게네. 레 요하다 미고 사서네 과고요라. 미고레 사서는 예선께 교회레 사서나 and Lata Melchiora. In the Numobe, one Gisabe, Lady, Dorcoviora, Pancuora. But in the Zangao Yabe, Nanzidi Numobe, so there is some round to it. You want getting Gansos, I Ganso, Consos, Shota Shenso. You want get some jelly at Chaltangs, Rigs Nike. ngobole chakdan chusare niche diwange lesa sona kwaji ge ti pangwe samne ngazo konzo sero ngaje chado jesim sero ta tezula yandu tene kwale tandu tabachi chego sam echedo ne nyomolia nyembu tene yandu tene niri mechena la nyomo choru kondu choru ngaje choru 저도 초로 만지 초로 나에게 잠시 지게나 느껴와 치마 가서 그래 교와 고액 교와래 하루에 기분 좋게 삼을 거고 알아 어디 지서
Mhm. So then, for the being of small scope on a day-to-day basis, for the sake of gaining a good rebirth, they try to then abandon those kinds of negative, harmful actions towards others to benefit others as much as we can. And those kinds of negativities that we have done in countless previous lives, we try to purify and confess those negativities. And one gets to a point where you're sort of naturally drawn to abandoning those non-virtues and engaging in virtue in order to be able to ensure that you get a good rebirth as a human or a god. But even if we should gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, although we have avoided the lower realms, it is still a rebirth within samsara that is in the nature of suffering. This kind of birth that is taken up under the control of karma and the afflictions is going to be in that nature of suffering. So long as we uncontrollably have to cast off our aggregates and take up new ones due to the force of our karma and afflictions, it is in the nature of suffering. So, recognizing that, someone then gives rise to this thought: I need to gain a definite freedom from this cycle of rebirth. And what is it that is causing me to have this kind of cycling in samsara? Well, from engaging in actions, when we engage in virtuous actions, we can gain a good rebirth, and non virtues lead to lower rebirths. But so long as we are creating karma, and our karma is in turn driven by our afflictions, we will continue to uncontrollably take rebirth within samsara. So, the root of this is really the thought of I. When we have this grasping at an I, a self, and then all of the various thoughts of like mine and my side and the other side, we have a sense of attachment to our own side and aversion, hatred for the other side. And due to this, all of our various afflictions arise, like pride and jealousy and anger, resentment, hatred, and so forth. And so, recognizing that it is from this that all of our suffering comes, there is this thought of I need to gain a definite freedom from this cycle of rebirth due to karma and the afflictions. And so, on a regular basis, I'm going to strive to reduce those afflictive emotions, or my attachment and my anger and so forth, and eventually get rid of them completely, gaining thereby a freedom from that cycle of rebirth. So this, in turn, is liberation, freedom from that. This is the kind of attitude of being a middling scope.
Oh yeah. Da te chile samlo korne. Oh da rajibu wale tarwache. Tendo tarwache. Tendo samlo tandisa. So chendi amala soba. Tezulia jibu chambata tsawa yorna. Nyebu yorwa. O tezule samlo che matache. So jibu tungele tare samlo tane marwa re samdiora. rāng kua nā shi kōnzu ngā yī sam chādāng bē wāndu shi wāndu kūru. Yō tōma mē bā nē tētū māmbu chi nyōng, tā tā rī ngā dzū pātā mā chi chi rīwa rē chōng chi tē tē rwa. Yī ndē kōnzu lī yā samlu chi mā tā rāng chi bū tōngē lī tā ndū samlu tā nā mā rāba rē sam chi. Tē sū yā tōngē tā chē wā lā chi tōngē chi chē gu rē samlu kō wā rā. Yī ndē kōnzu chēndī lī yā nē mā kati marshe bala soba ta madi sama tamche chishu do indu chigora imo te nyamdo parshe ba sera nyendo sheba tobo sheba rangi sazan da bchine da buda pomo sheba so sendel rala kare chishu inaya o te samlutani te nashi sendal pa tunga chairo inde tazo tungele tawa tabshe ure samche samlutani 마시 텐데 텐솔에 소바테 삼다 아니 그 삼르다도 자테 텐데 지부게 이 말을 대다 년제 망부여다 텐데레 년제 망부여라 대수 참아 삼르다 아테나시 저 통만 메데 저항아마시 단당 배출로 대 인지 메지 삼르 개침부라 저야 삼르다도사 소소 풍부 제도를 마도 남시 대다 다되게 저 통만 메한데시 아다 메다시 계도 라메다 녀니 어데로 어디인데 저 치마야 여름 보셔보시 봐 어에 매버지 풍부 제도를 류 제도를 마도 가사디 샘디 로데요라 다른 뭐 삼다고라 이인데네 겨월 통만 메두자 샘제 셴다시 신대년데 상마 겨 삼제도 꼬르게 되고 말어 저 띵아마 밀리케나 야카와케나 던드리케나 다음에 봐 겨월 다음에도 소소 바다 마다 니다 니둘러 서봐 디 제버는 디 마셔르세 문지 로가 지에서면도와 하고 에면도와 이집회가 마시면 봐도 탐제란데 저요 샤시르 삼다 탐제 마르셰 발라서 봐 나 란데 저요 게 tinch부 뭐 삼다네 이 탐제 란데 총바 코아코알 때도 일에 타고 자고 요삼 심지어 탐제 동해에 땐도 타와 지리아 로버치 통계게 라교 그세 연대 군대지 가사신 줄고 요삼 그세 연대지 군대 그세 연대 군대지 가사데 탑다 실험이가 야르겠다니 차고라 탑장바다 저와 셴뱅이 삼로 실업되네 대ton달이야 동해대체에 두가래 탑시가래 대주가가시 다음에 발라서 와시 탑다 실험 이부들이야 배데 아직뿐만 봐 심지어 탐제리야 이름해 봐야 동해대체와다 탐제 김백고만 더 발라서 봤는데야 누가 여수서 봤거네 해통 것이 최고였음 근데 미 타는 물샤네 껴네 껴왔더니 깔래 때문에 산재지 고만 더 봤지 있음 근데 제시 더 봤지 있음 근데 섬으로 타네니 먼저 람메 고마름지 tukne tarwala soban yomo choro ta teane tamje kimba simje tamje gatondo ogba sanje ji koma tobar cha te chido chonye gi isam ono se tamne sembar shusene o de
Mm. So then thinking about that even if we were to attain our own liberation alone, just to proceed to try to gain that freedom for ourselves without thinking about all of those other kinds of beings, those who have shown us great kindness. So to just think of ourselves is really sort of base. It's kind of a low way of thinking. All of these beings who have been so kind to me, they would continue to experience the sort of sufferings that arise from that grasping at a self and all of the afflictions that come out of that. And so, rather than just thinking about one's own self, we should think about these other beings and wish to help them. It is based upon reflecting that these beings have shown us great kindness, thinking about them having been our mother and so forth. Now, usually we talk about recognizing them as having been our mothers, because the mother is a being that has shown us such great kindness. But we could think about all beings as having been like our father or our friends or those who are dear to us that love us. And so, too, when we recognize the kindness that that being has shown us, we apply that to all other sentient beings, because again, in this context of Buddhism, it's very important to have the kind of long-term view over many lifetimes, such that we recognize it's not like in the way that we are, say, close to some in this life. It's not as though this is the only lifetime that we have had. Although we cast aside the kind of form aggregates that we have had, our mind will continue on. The mental consciousness has traveled through countless lives, and therefore we have had relationships with all sentient beings. We can't point to one and say they haven't shown me kindness. They have not been my mother or my father or this being that has taken care of me and shown me kindness and love. And given that there are countless lifetimes in the past, there's no limit other than not recognizing these beings as having acted in this capacity. We are actually have this kind of relationship. And therefore, if we recognize that kind of kindness, that great kindness that other sentient beings have shown us, there's a thought that I need to repay that kindness. I need to somehow benefit them. And although right now we may not be able to provide them full benefit, there's this attitude of thinking, well, may I become someone who is able to fully benefit all sentient beings, a Buddha who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, who has the kind of knowledge of all of the points of what should be adopted and abandoned. And in order to be able to attain such a state, we ourselves need to engage in both wisdom and method to be able to sort of gain all of the skillful means as well as knowledge of all phenomena. This is what we are trying to pursue, such a state of perfect enlightenment. And it's not as though this is something that we can do necessarily in a single lifetime, but we need to have a very long-term kind of view, that lifetime after lifetime, in stages, sequentially gaining good rebirths in order to continue our practice. We are going to strive to attain that state of perfect, complete enlightenment in order to be able to benefit all sentient beings. So we should set our motivation like this for listening to the teachings, that this is our intention, our motivation.
yeah. I am Ombu Kasure. Ombu Nombo Kyan. Samlutan Chene. Sem Kitu Shenda Che Yugura. 당신님지 세요. 어디 삼을다도 근데 당겨서다. 아담마다 녀당이도 줘발 써봐. 그래서 장장 멤버체. 심지어 컨디션이나 라 대완돌 동에 면도 가려서 현대 상마 대완돌 동에 면도 반다르래서 인도자 랑게 동에 세제 머신도 생기 동에 동에 세고 그래서 랑게 대화대 톱자의 머신도 생기 대화대 주로 제고래 톱부저래 대화 선서 주저래 주로 제고래서 뒤인도 단다 봐도 소소 대화대 개치시지 랑 개치시지 랑이 지시지 셰야워도 ele tiene cariño un dicho que chiche naya y tendale ale shala sawache shala tojo shala soba kanga te ti chongsha sam ranchin ji de le kyantu ta shara ranchin ji de toma mewan ye yore ranch ke chiche ne ta je toma mewan ne ke chiche ta ta je de yabura shibuji chago re ke chaya yo mara ati ranchin ji de kyantu shi de ti chasha sam 정말 매번에 제 단도를 가지고 생체 버진 버렸지 내가 제는 갖다주 과거 대응 말을 상계 서그래 섬겨라 어디도 자다 뼈간 거디라 게 시시지 뒤쪽에서 라니 진지 그거 끊지 고시 안에 싫어 라 진지 뒤에는 셴뱅이 섬을 다시 붙이고 말해 밑종내는 시리 종내서 소보 종에 나대는 숙심을 내가 지메던 게 차그라 어디 내시리서 근데 섬을 아니라 앞에 저 도마면 삼을다다 강가 노르샤삼 셴제 버리는 게 있나 오늘 전에 다시 듣기를 샤서 셴기 전다 장장 모두 다음에 셴제 봐서 어디인데 라진진다 셴진진이 견다 연년이 소소다 삼을다 라진진이 그거 셴진진이 연대 탐제시리 다 진짜 다다 셴제 보자 삼자랑 치슈시 첩들이야 셰게 치슈시 안더버도 랑게 심부지 셴 야와도 했어들이야 라이 셴기도 야와도 셴기도 랑게 때에 뭐 삼다 근데 전에 답이 셴집에 장주기 셈 심지어 탐지도 사게 짓고 도와 지하고도 삼 셴집을 근데 거네니 군노세 때문에 세버슈시안시 예, 그 전주 그 sembi sembe코네 삼을단다 제여러 텐데스 또 섬시네 sem버슈스탄데 그래 야
So, there's also another way to generate bodhicitta that's said to be for those of sharper faculties. So, not just thinking about the kind of connection that we have had with others, of them as having been our mothers and fathers and dear loved ones and so forth, but just recognizing that in the same way as we don't want to suffer and we want to have happiness, all other sentient beings are the exact same. This kind of development of bodhicitta through the equalizing and exchanging of self and other begins with recognizing that our own happiness and others' happiness, like these are both things to be achieved, and suffering is something to be gotten rid of. And so, up until now, we have actually, due to holding ourselves as most important, and due to that kind of self cherishing attitude, we disregard others, we harm them, we criticize them, we do things to put them down. And yet, all of the kinds of troubles that we experience are due to the fault of this self cherishing attitude. This is the worst kind of fault that we can have. It is due to the work of our self cherishing that all of the bad things come about. Like as it said, this self cherishing attitude is the door to all fault, all bad things. It's described as well as being like a chronic disease. When you have a chronic disease, it limits your mobility, it limits what you can do. And so, too, this self cherishing attitude is like a chronic disease that we have had up until now. We have been totally mistaken. We think that our self cherishing is giving us happiness, but actually, it's the fault. It's the source of all of our faults and problems. And on the other hand, an attitude which cherishes others and values others is the foundation of all qualities. And so recognizing the faults of one and the qualities of the other, there's the exchange of our self-cherishing attitude with the attitude of cherishing others in the way that we would normally sort of neglect others. We now turn that towards ourselves and value and cherish others. And in this way, we are able to exchange those kinds of attitudes, and thus thinking about the benefits of of cherishing others, we give rise to the kind of striving. I want to become a Buddha in order to be able to really fully benefit others. And so we should set our kind of attitude, our motivation along these lines with a bodhicitta motivation for listening to these teachings. So please, again, set a proper motivation.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 그래. 너 tenjuwe lundi tanga zu di samdi ba. tenjuwe lundi tanda chema kor shegdo wa. Da te chode ba. Oh. tenjuwe lundi chema sheba rangi juyi ji so chela milushins. O te ba samdi le. O chema shege wara. chema shede tanda nga zu ibu langdo la jube yu so sen jidebe jasha tabachi ne dra. 아니 제 다르바도 탐제 침바 근데나 내가 근데 전에 그 참매 제수단 내가 지금 와라 인도 않고 사도 밀로에 참마셔야 돼 기부 밀로와 기부 가사주 가르사물도 안에는 소소 내가 때 만호를 제치두고 요래서 이 제게 그 유식고라 텔레 참마셔 와라 나들 가셔서는 지루받아 들으시나 왕보도 참마셔라 미게 왕보 나의 왕보 내 왕보 제 왕보 류지 왕보세 원부 숙제부터 참말해서 인도 샤에 지어라. 뒤에 원부 숙제부터 참말 말해서 넘버잖아. 참말해야 돼. 시바질 샤고래서. 원부 숙제부터 멜로나 시르게 되어라. 명화들 버저 송예대 차례네 시바가 띠바 신기어라. 너의 원부들의 수피 자드 수샤. 텔레폰 시바 판지기어라. 뒤에 가서래. 저도 참아 말해서 참아도 쉐벌이 샤고 그래서 밀루에 쉐버실이야 세시를 봐 유추세 파시 통계 인데스 거라 공부도서 멜론나 신데시라 틀고 차르데를 봐도 그랑 시에 지요 말에 텔레 때는 쉐버가니 신기어라 인데 참아셔야 돼 기부 밀루와 관계 제수단에 기부 내가 참아 만노를 제체도 그래서는 직대단 직대를 내배 저와 가리나야 어디 밀루에 쉐바듯이 쉐바셔야 되게 소부 차시 뒤도 두바트 쪽에 팬토 그랬대 쉐발을 로고치 그랬대 어디 가서 그래 참아 말해서 참아도 세시를 왜 쉐발 샤고 그래서 이 쉐거라 어디 질랍나
No. So here, then picking up in the text, we are on, I believe it's page 79, where it says, in this prasangika system, that which is called valid cognition is not mistaken in regard to its principal phenomena, its object of engagement. And so here, when it comes to, then this section is talking about valid cognitions and what are valid cognitions. So whether it comes to something that we are doing that is sort of a worldly activity, it follows after. We're able to accomplish our work based upon having a valid understanding, a proper understanding. And so too, even more so when it comes to things like liberation or the state of omniscience, whether it is a worldly or a kind of transcendent phenomena, it follows after. We are able to accomplish it based upon having a proper valid cognition. And so there are those that would assert that the physical sense powers are valid cognitions. However, as it says here, the Prasangika's systems is it's a consciousness. So the physical sense powers act like sort of mirrors. They reflect the various objects, like we have sound and our ear consciousness, or visual forms and our eye sense power. And that is like a reflection that is then passed on to the consciousness. So according to the Prasangika system and others, the consciousnesses are what are valid or not. Something that is like a physical aggregation of particles, that's a physical sense power. It doesn't have the ability to be a valid cognition in the sense that a valid cognition has to have that capacity of being consciousness, of being clear and knowing. So while the sense powers can reflect various objects, they're sort of a necessary tool for our consciousness to arise. It is not as though the physical sense powers can be determined to be valid or not. So here again, when it comes to any sort of mundane or transcendent phenomena, it is based upon that valid knowing.
Oh yeah. Looking sound of Jeanette, which Wombule computer to Sunali Kanka Tata Sula Unkodwa, Chichi Kodu Sema in Besura Chirete. In me, Namju Sheba, the Pa Shashan, Sheba take a charge you are a collet session to see the mother. Korakaya to do a Korakaya to Lea Sheva Mara. I see the Sheba Samlutane, and it is session to Tatinal, Tata Mamu Melo, where is it? Or Gina. 공부 참여는 뜻서 참아서 보라. 참아 말이 시바티 미 남주 시럽기 내가 제거라. 야.
Mhm. So these days there might be those who say like computers have valid cognition or are valid in this way because they can like compute and do all of these things in an accurate sort of a way. But really, it's not as though the aggregation of those particles is what makes that happen, but it's the intelligence of humans, consciousness used by humans to create that then allows for that to happen. So we couldn't posit like a computer as being a valid cognition.
Oh yeah. I don't know the thank you lulu seme call shegora. In the thank you lulu the sema sheba rangi yuji so chola melushin se. Rangi yuji so chola meluatela sema segure segora. Chidang ko thank you lulu chana. Sheba lokshe ina sema mainge to sama milam je sheba to china ko tire teora. Rangi nawale sema yisura. Milam tang de rangazu kanga nor rete yina ko ni se on du sa milam lia kar thon te kanga teng do ma je. Ki ten chung ge de milam sheba de ko to de yora. Nawa de sheba kora kar nawa de sema yisura. Sheba sama rangi nawale sema yisura. Yina ko rangi nawale sema yiba samji sema shawi omare. Yu ji zo de samlu ta sa da zo de miluwa je ti sema tilia sema yina ni sema shagura. Oh, te do kasa. Rangi juyi ji sowe chola milu shense. Ji chane yu tara jingde shila jugbe nibada denba shila samar jogba yase. Jidang chane ko tuidu tuba tuidu zulya yu tara samal jugbe niba ke yo marwa. Deba ta mao ba ta chi tongba nye tende samal tane ko yutuk marwa. Sheba digi samal tane shirab digi samal tane ti chane yu tara kari na ko jugbe niba yora. Oh, this is what this is good. This is Sheba de the Chamasha Grace, Session with Sheba. Yeah, you just told the Milua Manora Chile, Chamasha Grace, Gora. But Joba in Bear. Pembosine, to the two better Pembosectua. You took G, one bonamne, Chi Chana, you tower Mabushila, one botazo, Surajine, Muayina, Kado the Yip de Chargira. Now I'm in a tradition chagger, Mado Shandaka Chagmarwa. The youth someone is you by Chish and I could never get your Marisora. Sheba in a session batilla, and I call you Tara someone is you when never you are. You to get your hot is what. One bonamne, Chish and you, Mabushilla, Juba, never maybe. Semar Mirora, soon last. And you say she will be lonely, Semar. Jogo by Indies, you say she will Shebatelia Chamashagur Mado Wangbuta, or to Zutini Chamamare Sigora, or Tini Tibatu Chilana.
So here, then we are talking about in the Prasangika system, what is posited as a valid cognition. So, in this Prasangika system, that which is called valid cognition is not mistaken in regard to its principal phenomena, its object of engagement. So, here, when it comes to what makes something a valid cognition, for example, we need to distinguish between being unmistaken with regard to its principal phenomena, or the object of engagement, and being sort of valid with respect to the appearing object. So, for example, like with some wrong consciousnesses, or for like in a dream, we have various things that appear to us, and those consciousnesses that like that are conscious of those various appearances. Those appearances are something that we can remember later. We can have it is valid with respect to the appearance that came, but it's not valid with respect to the object of engagement, or its main its principal phenomena. So for something like, for example, a dream consciousness to be valid with respect to its appearances does not mean that it's valid with respect to its object of engagement. So here then, in general, they also posit as valid cognition the ability to engage either a subtle or a coarse object. The physical sense faculties generally do not have the ability to engage subtle objects, and therefore it is therefore said that they are unsuitable to be valid cognizers. So here, when it comes to, for example, like our visual consciousness can only take on color and form, and our audio consciousness, or the the sense faculties themselves can only perceive color and form, and our audio consciousness can only perceive sound, and so forth. But it is our consciousnesses, like our mental consciousness in particular, those consciousnesses that are clear and knowing, that can take either a sub or can engage with either a subtle or a coarse object. So we have the distinction between consciousness, being clear and knowing, able to be aware of something, to take an object, and that which is material, the physical sense faculties, which are composed of atoms and so forth. They, again, that subtle physical sense power has the ability to sort of reflect an object, but it doesn't have the ability to engage in subtle objects, or like different types of objects, whereas a consciousness has the ability to engage with various coarse and subtle objects.
그래. 당만 뒤치려면. 근데 뭔가 좀 밀람단 뒤서라. 밀람리야 미래지 투거리야. 그래서 주키를 밀람당이나. 니 세대자고 밀람디 남자 쇼자고 세버시 땡기도 와. 그래서 시바데 나올 세마이 베터로. 밀로아데 마레데 치고네 키요 말아가지고. 밀람당에서 치고네 키요 말아. 세상 그 유지 쪼들라 밀로아레면도 나와대 와라. 그래서 저 세마 말에 랑게 나올래 세마레. 유지 쪼올래 세마 말에. 단다 딜 세마 이미데 유지 쪼들라. 세마 이미 샤고레 소소 어디지 라베샤. 어디지 랍샤나.
Mhm. So, again, the difference between something being valid with respect to an appearing object and valid with respect to its principal object, or its principal phenomenon, its object of engagement, we could take the example of like a dream. If in a dream you meet someone, or say you imagine being like carried away by water, you feel a fear at that consciousness is valid with respect to the appearance of being carried away by water, but it's not valid with respect to its principal phenomena, or the object of engagement. And so the kind of appearances being valid with respect to an appearance doesn't make a consciousness valid with respect to its principal phenomena, or its object of engagement.
어야 다디 로로마도 왕불이 참마샤주요 마레세티 롱디 공장교라 돌레사 디다르 뭐보 데다 세미신세 지다르 왕부 데다 참셔 왕부 미완 나와 정화를 소바테서 참마 마레스거라 세미신세 뭐니지 뱀보 롱마데 고랑 랑신데 랑신기 뱀보레 뚜두 주바레스거라 뚜두 주바레스 여와다 미게와도 롱마데 나네 롱마테레스 고 겨다 미겨한테 이렇게 말와 미와 나와죠. 아니 셰다 최지 잡에 남들래 된 도에 로르와 단 남들 롱장도 최지 잡에 남들래 멘들로네 차만이서 원부터도 차만 되고 말해 셔라 지루가 셔네 멘들 셔라 차만데 가르 샤워스네 세시르베 로니를 샤워를 해서 멘들로네 차만이서 란다 가르서 론 고날 차마 샤워했다 다 가르서나 란다 도제 뭐뭐 연주를 대중이 돼서 이부 란도라 죽베 주소데 로그치 그래서 그래 셰바그치 그래서 세시르베 셰바데그치 그래 미완데 그 강가치 두고 말도 그 멜론에서 차대라 차라리 때는 셰베 바르기도 와 셰바가 이 제라니 이지 셰바가 삼르다는 라면데 강가 이 마부신야 용도 와 열 때는 마부시에 두고도 와 맨들로네 차만이 있어 죽을 때서 인데 이부 랑도라 죽베 주의 쏘데 셰바데레 때나네 시럽대로 와 되기와잖아 시럽 제바치가 시럽대로 랑도라 죽베 주의 쏘데 이베치다 유남전에 타데베 로에도와 타데시르 에난데 외치르 시발이야 유지 라메다 남바 라메다 지샤르소나 와 유지 남바 타데베서라 로네 도바 로에 도바 타데 유 라메다 돈두사 디치 토니야 삼루치탄 팀 멤버싱그리야 삼루치탄 팀 멤버싱그레 로리야 유지 샤네니 유지 찍밀로아 찍여나 아텔레 삼루탄에니 라메다 마부셰도 와티 강가 로그셰도 거라 셰바가 세시르 봐 그래서다 유남전에 타데베 유지 남바 타데 유카가 가가 임바되게 텔레 셰바가네 삼루탄에 유메다메다 나르마시바 마부사바사바 마부셰 요레스고라 유남전에 타데베 로에 또바 타데시르 에나데 요시르어서 유토베 셰바 찍 밀로아 찍여나 텔레 때네니 티네 다 간데레서 좋아 세리르치나 고 유치 밀로아 젠테네 삼르다는 라면다시 강가셰 두고요라 어때니 최르치나 고 메다바도지 수르치 셰니 테리 삼르다네 메다바다 지 동해와다 네주 가르셰고나 마부셰 요라 밀로아 찍 매바시 강가 논교 장이네 밀로무소레네 사바셰 케고 마라 밀로아시 셰바치 요체 유디 남바 라면다샤야 예제 네 삼르다네 베 유라면다셰니야 야게 그저는 줘야도 와oti 용요레서 대연나도 예시로스 사투밀로에 셰바 대연나 유지 남바르다 샤게 네 유토베 참아 바르마셰바 야게 도레서 셰인데 야게 도네 남바랑 셰게 차처처처 도레서 거라 어디보다 시도나
Mm. So, thus, it is necessary to posit as a valid cognizer the mind that illuminates and knows its object. So, here then, as a source for this, it says then from the King of Concentration Sutra states, it is like this. These sensory faculties are not valid cognizers. They are naturally material and ethically neutral. So here, the sense faculties, our sense powers, are material. They are not to be posited as valid cognizers because, again, they are material. They are something composed of atoms and don't have the ability to be aware of an object, although they act sort of like a mirror. It's something that reflects its various objects. It doesn't have that kind of awareness of it. And then in Dharmakirti's commentary on valid cognition, he states that mind is the valid cognizer because it is the principal thing that engages objects to adopt or discard. So here, this is the main, the mind is what is a valid cognizer in the sense that it is the cause of developing wisdom, the cause of developing understanding. We know all kinds of various objects. It is the thing which engages in various objects, and based upon that understanding, we then engage in adopting certain things or discarding certain things. Mind is the principal thing that does that. By engaging in such objects, we engage in actions on the basis of that. And then it says, because there are different kinds of objects, they are cognized by different kinds of minds. So we have the mind has the ability to understand various different kinds of objects. We are able to know things based upon, like, the mind has that ability to taking on a particular object. We can say, oh, it is this, or oh, it is this. We know them as different things. And based upon that kind of knowledge, again, uh, once this undeceived mind exists, this ability to have a continuum of valid cognition exists. So it is based upon that kind of undeceptive mind of valid cognition that we can increase the continuum of that, or develop the continuum of that. If we come to an understanding, this is impermanence, this is selflessness, and so forth, and engage the mind with those various objects, we can have the ability to improve our understanding, develop our wisdom and our thinking, because it is possible to engage with minds in this way. So, again, once this undeceived mind exists, the ability to have a continuum of valid cognition exists, in the sense that we can develop an understanding, increase and develop that.
Oh yeah. 공도 도다 우만 주바라 이다 미기 쉐바소 쳔마 멤버 송바네 로데다 시르 유 강라야 쳔마 마임버 송바 마인게세 쉐바데다 유 랑게 쳔이지 주바모 랑원에 주바 아 유지 데코나니라 유지 데코나니 담네루 타둘라 쳔마 멤버 송바 인신스도 공도 롱탈 조사르다 미다 나와 나야 쳔마메 제단 류다 이견 쳔마메 얘들 원부터다 세연에 파괴람지 술래 지시자시겠지 너날 지송고도 와 어디나시 오마 주바다 주날 소야라 어디가 수 쉐바도 강가 쳔마 말을 송고도 와 이치다 유 강라야 쳔마 많이 송고요 말을 이 쳔마메 송바데 이네 가르에서나 공도 오마 주바 쳔마 멤버 송바도 세워라 yu kānglā nēlu yu rāngwīne chūpa nāngi wārā ngānsu yu kāndē chī tōna rāngwīne chūpa kurā rāngwāntu chūpa rī kurā ngwīne yobari sū nāngi wārā ngwīne chēne yu kāndē chīne ku chāshē māmbu chī ndē chī tsōne ngānsu lē pā tāni chī tōngu yorā mātō yu kurā chī kī rāngwīne ngā rāngi yu sīngē rā rāngshīn kī rāngi kōngi tsuk tūpa sīgirā tā sūpa chē sūpa sīgirā 딱서가 째서서 시카바요스네 대예수 주주서 예배소리지 나기도와 예수자 코텐데 요네 따째니 니에 요고라 요 우메 따와가서 마부 째기도 이르베시데 가르체고스네 라와도 주바 요네 코나 유징원에 나가랑 그 요세베 라와도 주바시 요네 따 가디 인시째니 니에 요고라 째기 와라 얘네 딱 봐서 탕에도 요바들 째니 니에 그요 말에 아니 바다는 거기에 군대지 통해서나 어떻게 강발에다 비가 나가는다 따서나 나게 반지버마도 가게 나가는 세계라 유군식이요 고식이요 도대식이요 세대세요 말이지 내 당연이야 나게 뒤버치를 침발에 또왜 따섬 세티시라 또왜 딴다가리마도 이거 말 당에도 여바들려 얘네 딱 봤으면 샤워 그래 쟤는 얘 요거 말 라옹은에 지여바 얘네 딱 가들어서 그런 거네 얘나 자세 마음부 되는 말이 되는 말 딱 가그래서 쟤는 얘 요거로 어디인데 나라도 쉐바가 유컨데지 토나 랑와도 주반난 거 요래 미기 쉐바에 나나에 쉐바네 쉐바 이기 쉐바 강갈이야 어디 나라도 쉐바래 랑와도 주반 나와나시 아니 텔레 쳔마 마레세 랑와도 주바티 너네 통고 요래세 이시요라 이 강가 랑와도 주반 나와나시 템바 얘나 나라도 쉐바 강가 템바레도라 참아레도라 네루레 참아레도네 네루 타둘 참아레 어디 네루 나와나 신기 유라원네 주바 라와도 주바 네루스 주바 텔레 참아마레세거 나와나 신 텔레 참아예나 유라원네 주바 라신지 주바 때다 뭐 주바레도라 나라도 강가 네루 타두데 통화레도거라 일레 학베 네루 메레 타가라 네루 타두예거라 어디 숨거라 니가 말해서 유지 내로 타둘라 참마 많이 벌 송바 인신세 어디버도 지구나.
So, here then, continuing in the text, it says, the statements from the sutra and from entering the middle way above regarding the mind and visual consciousness and so forth not being valid cognizers are not saying that these minds are not valid with respect to any object whatsoever. So here, there are quotations like from the King of Concentration Sutra and so forth that describe our sense consciousnesses as not being valid. And here there's a quotation before, I can't find the exact quotation he gave, but that will come below where it says, if these sense consciousnesses were valid cognitions, of what use to anyone would the noble being's path be? So here, when it comes to those visual consciousnesses and so forth not being valid cognizers, it's not saying that these minds are not valid cognizers with respect to any object whatsoever, but they are saying that these minds do not validly cognize the ontological status or reality of their objects or their objects' establishment by way of their own characteristics or establishment in their own right. So here, when it comes to the way that objects appear to us, the object appears as if like established from its own side, autonomous, independent, even though this is something that occurs due to an aggregation of many parts coming together and so forth, and us designating it as such. Things appear to us as though they like existed in and of themselves, as if they could withstand analysis or scrutiny, as if it's like there is something right there that we could just point to and say, this is that thing. But it isn't the case that phenomena actually exist in that way. So if it were the case that phenomena had such a mode of existence, if they really did exist in the way that they appeared to us, as though they could withstand scrutiny, could bear analysis, or sort of existed in their own right, then when we searched for them, we should be able to find them among the various parts. Like if we're looking at a house and we have and we're looking through like the windows and the doors and the walls and so forth, we should be able to find something that is that house. But we can't actually find such a thing. But whatever is dependently designated, that is its level of existence. You don't need to search beyond that. It is sufficient to say, like, this exists as a dependent designation. We don't need to be able to find something that is really existent from its own side, but rather that level of existence as being dependently designated suffices for it to function within the world. But if we assert if various objects existed in the way that they appear to us, including the way that they appear to our senses, then we should be able to find that thing, right? That has that kind of autonomous, independent existence. And so our sense consciousnesses, all of our consciousnesses, are mistaken with respect to the object being autonomously existent. They can be valid with respect to the object, but still not have an understanding or be valid with respect to the ontological status or the reality of their objects and their object's establishment by way of their own characteristics or in their own right.
Oh yeah. 다 대체네 시도 돼 시도. 다도 내로를 참아 말을 랑원에 주가 나와나 싶을 참아 말했어. 지난 참아 말했어. 왜 말했어라. 안들이야 단다 롱된 도에 롱다 뜻으세네. 해봐 망보게 근데 송게 와라. 소소게 미기다 나와 나 이지 셰벌서 봐 참아. 당지 너를 내가 따라서 록시를 참아 말했어. 그래서 유 매버치리 여번 제대로 그래서 먼저 통대에 대해서 강가 군주 좀 버려. 대해서 강가 요 말해서 동반이 시대 대해서 강가 매매 단달 시에요라. 대세도자 일롱 개심부터 장거래. 먼저 규제 시바 강가 tema 말해서 한예배 사만지 되면 강가. 인디인데 소도 와서 거라. 어떻게 말해서 이내루를 tema 매서요라 마도. 나와나시 나한테 유랑한테 주바텔 tema 말해서 송거를 마도 지단테 소리 tema 요 말해서 요 말해서 이게 전부시 시여라. 어디서 랍시나.
Mm. So here, what is being said is that these are not valid with respect to the kind of ultimate nature, with respect to phenomena existing by means of their own characteristics. And so there are those that would say that, well, this is all of these are not valid at all because they're sort of imputing some kind of existence onto something that is non-existent. And so they might want to assert that our worldly valid cognitions can't be valid because they're not valid with respect to the ultimate nature of phenomena. But here it's important to distinguish that even without being valid with respect to that kind of ultimate nature, our worldly valid cognitions can be valid. And so there will be a very important quotation that here comes to support this.
뭐야? 나한테 취니스 디다르스도 심지어 남지 수자라 속배세 수자라 속배 취남 랑게 생이지 주바다 랑원에 주바 신신에세 이 생기 와라 말아줘 간게 대다게 무슨야 대다르 주바나시 무슨라야 미게 쉐바다 저거 텐진데 시그 말데 나야데 나데 랑원에 주바 나게 와라 미와 미신 나시 지시 rāngā tu tūpañ jīndā sikī yō mā, nāngi yō rē. Jīndā di kā rē sū chā tī rō rē shā jīngi yō rā. Nāng tē tī kō tī rāngā wā chī nāng tī yō rē, kō rāngā nē yō rē. Tūpa sīn jī tē tā kī ngū sūm lā yā tē tā tūpa nāng yā sē. Tē tā nā wā tā tū tēmbā mā yīn bē sē, nā wā nā shī tēmbā tū yō mā rā. Ngā tū nā wā nā shī tēmbā tū yō mā rē. Nā wā tē nā rāngā nē tūpa nāng tē yō rā. Temba mayin bese, luam tsumba danse, lua rese, tsumba rese, kunzub temba she chawa son, te sonzan tele tsumba ase re, tsumba rituwa, kunzub temba ase. Kunzub temba ase de takar se wasene. Kunzub se de ra, rang ngusumdo nawe lo tele, nawa nashi temba mendo na kunzub temba ase wara. rāngu sumdu tōngi lō tila nāwa nāshi tīmbā dōna tōndam tīmbā āsi gōre. Tōngba nyingu sumdu tōngi lō tila tīnsi yō mārī, tīmbā nāngi yō mārī, tīmbā trūpa nāngi yō mārī. Nāwa nāshi tātā trūpi yō rē, tōngba nyingu sumdu lō tila, tōngba nyiti nāwa tātā trūpi yō rē. Tīmbā trūpa nāngi yō mārī. Tōndam tīmbā āsi lō tōndamba, tōngba nyingu sumdu tōgba yō tila, rāngu sumdu tōgba lō la nāwa tātā tīmbā rē. Kawa bomba sutra rekchala soba nga ranzu meshi nashi ta yiki shiba tuzu nandu nawa nashi temba maare yu rangu ne tuba nangi yorte rangu ne tuba tuba ne yo marwa yiki kunzub temba asir kunzub se kunzub ya odi chilapsina.
So living beings conceive phenomena, forms, sounds, and so forth as being established by their own characteristics or from their own side. They appear to living beings to be findable even by a direct perception, but these objects are not true as they appear. Therefore, they are called truths for a concealer, falsities, or deceptions. So we all sort of have the appearance of phenomena existing by way of their own characteristics. And these objects, they don't exist in the way that they appear. We all sort of grasp at them as existing that way, and they appear to us as if they had that kind of existence. But it's not. So here, when it comes to the way that our various sense consciousnesses and so forth, they hold various objects like form and sound and so forth. And these, although they appear to have, again, that kind of true existence, they don't actually exist in the way that they appear. So they're called truths for a concealer, or falsities or deceptions, in that they are sort of falsely established to the mind that is perceiving these various appearances of true existence. The kinds of objects that they take appear in one way, but they don't actually exist in that way. Whereas for for example, to the mind that is directly realizing emptiness. Emptiness in that context exists as it appears. There's no appearances of true existence, and therefore it is totally non-deceptive. But when we have the various kind of objects of our senses, pots and pillars and forms and sounds and so forth, all of those various objects appear to have kind of true existence, even though they don't actually exist in that way. And so, therefore, again, they're not true as they appear. Therefore, they are called truths for a concealer, falsities, or deceptions.
Yeah. Doles longe doa. Kunzup to ne ngo nam yese. Kunzup to ngo tamje yese. Dam to ngo nam rangshin ji tuba mese. Yese ro rangshin ji mese se uda. Oh, tene. Kunzup to ne ngo nam yese. Dam to ne rangshin mese. Rangshin me la kan noro tene kunzup temba yese. Rangshin me bale sutra tiru chala sobe ngo nam. Rangshin ji me bale ya rangshin ji yeba norne zenge lote. Ngole temba sonja kunzup temba se. Lo kunzup ba tenzin ji ngor temba samiyengi. Ngole teta mai bene kunzup temba se to. Kunzup singe de lo kunzup ba. Lo tel sha tenzin de sha. Ngole ya rangun de tuba ta temba de temba ro ko. Ngone yeba zengi ora. Ora ngole temba de ma to temba marwa chida. Non ne zengi ora che che kunzup temba se. Che son sos. O ti chi laksha.
So then from the Descent to Lanka Sutra, it states, these objects exist conventionally. Ultimately, they have no inherent existence. That which is mistaken with respect to the lack of inherent existence is that which is a truth for a concealer. So these phenomena, they exist conventionally, but they don't exist ultimately. They appear to us, again, as though they had that kind of inherent existence, although they actually lack that. So to this kind of conventional mind, to that perspective, it is it is mistaken with respect to that true existence, but it is true in the sense that this object can be it appears as though it were truly existent to that kind of conventional mind. So to that perspective, that's why we call it a conventional truth, is it is a truth for that sort of concealer or for that mind, because it is mistaken with respect to the fact that these phenomena, although they lack inherent existence, appear to have such inherent existence.
Oh yeah. Get this study word malos. Get this sula sobe yute nam sutra tiru rechala sobe yute zo sigara. Simjen nam jesangara zo tondu san sigara. Rangune truba shenje se rangune truba nange yore shenge yorwa. Na ngare chashe sosura chashe na nga se tondu se rangwa chi rangune kora yonare sheudo mado. Kumbunga la teni pa takba samtila nga sigi samsa tero shingmedwa. Nga suyo nga rangune chi yoba samgudwa. Rangune yoba chi yona ani kawa yosane teni raya yoba sode samgudwa. Ito yo marwa ko. Kante chi yoresne kumbunga la teni takba samji. Kumburere chawa chi do nga de chawa chi rogi tegi. Samba kibudo kibumendo sere shawar mat. Ile loso shaya ke medwa. Kumbu tezo chawa chi dante taga chawa chi ba shawudwa. Ile chawa ma che ba kumbu nga ba kaya mai ba chi chawa chi nge shanda chi ke medwa. Tezo chawa chi ba tele taga chawa chi ba shawudwa. Tezo le teni ta shaza. Tezo chawa chi ba te taga chawa chi ba shawudwa. Kumbu si nga ba mai ge logari chi kuna ta yona. Sobu lega chi ba te taga chawa chi ba ndogu marwa. Sobu da ta pe kaga ni yona. Ta de loga chi yona. Sobu chawa chi ba te taga chawa chi ba ndogu marwa. Tena migi sheba rechi tayi ta sheba tayi na. Sobu chawa chi ba te taga chawa chi ba ndogu marwa. Sobu toshu ni miri bichi sewa yina. Toshu ni mi sewa yina. Semgi toshu ni mi sewa yo marwa. Chawa chi ba shaatu wate. Konzo taa si de jogu tsusi chik jangja me sa tezo re chawa chi ba te taga chawa chi ba shaagu. Tene takwa asitira. Sudan sheba nyi yora. Kanzo yoyate sobu chi yore tudu. Tima inge sheba seri chachi nidwa. Ingi la tene takwa shaa yora. Kansa de suwa mare. sobo yore so mare sheba revesa sheba mare ngo saba chiture demin duchi sigra sushi kaya mai be duchi sigdo ni chodu zanya ngo saba chitugo niga lega chidu daga chawa chawa shagdo ya tade manda sheba hoshi ya ote chilamia.
So, here, living beings conceive such objects as form and so forth to be established in their own right. And these objects appear to exist in their own right to their visual and other sense consciousnesses. So, here, the way that objects appear to us, both to our sense consciousnesses and to our mental consciousness, is as if they had that kind of autonomous, independent existence in their own right. So, like, for example, with the thought of I and the self, we don't think that we are merely designated upon these five aggregates. There's a sense of like there is an I that exists from its own side, not dependent upon anything else. And yet, when we think about it, like when we would try to search for where that I or that self is that exists within the aggregates, there's nothing that can be pointed to that is that self. So when we think about it, like if when our aggregates do, like if our form or our aggregates do an action, we say that the I does that action, the self is doing that action. And so if the self were somehow like apart from the aggregates, were somehow separate from the aggregates, then we would lose all logical connection there. You wouldn't be able to say that the self is doing that action when the aggregates are engaged in that action. So there can't be some sort of separate self. But if we try to point to something within the various aggregates, like we say okay, the mind is the self. Well, then say you pick up a rock with your body and you throw it at somebody and you kill them. Well, then we couldn't say that the self did that because the self is the mind and the mind didn't pick up a rock and throw it at somebody and kill them. And so there'd be all of these logical fallacies that would ensue if we were to try to assert that, say, the body were the self or the mind were the self, but rather it is independence upon this body and mind combination that we designate the self and I. So this is something which is, we usually term it to be a non-associated compositional factor, something that is neither form nor mind, that is this self. But there isn't something that we can point to within those aggregates or outside of them that exists, that is that self, that exists in its own right, although it appears to us as though it did. We don't think of ourselves as being just a mere designation on our aggregates.
Yeah. Like the solar so be youth and I'm so that you recall so youth. Simjan nam ge rangune to bar shenje se. Rangune to bar nage yore to rangune to bar jigi yore chera. Miki sheba la so bar rangune yoba nawatar. Dana tatar temba yona se. Miki sheba la ya. So that you recall so tabute. Rangune to bar nawana shit temba yona se gora. Rangune yona. 다자게 미기 셰발라 소바라 셰바 남비 수소 수소 네루 땅라 치더 여바시 통하인 베서 수소 랑원에 주바 나와나시 랑원에 주바 예나 코라 네루 고네도 통하라 랑원에 매바이나 랑원에 똥바데 네루 타도 차가라 랑원에 여나 랑원에 여바데 코라 네루 고네 드레더라 근데 존도 위요마 존도 요마라 랑원에 템바 통구요라 요코랑은 내줄라 가리 임바데 치마 지신 통구요라 이나 아니 가르스나 미게 셰발라 소바 네루 tonla 치더 네바시 통화 임베세 셰바데다 솔라 소바 랑게 천니지 주밤 랑원에 주바 통화 등이 템바 연구스 통화나시 템바 연구레서라 내가 수소 랑원에 여바 등이 뭐베 네루스냐니 랑원에 여바데 네루레도라 랑원에 똥바 네루레가 말해 이내 네루 치마 지시 통화래 당가라서 가게 랑원에 주바래 랑원에 주바 통화래 이 템바래 네루 통화래 랑원에 주바데 네루 샤도라 이 네루 타도 통화래 세우라 통화 중에 미기 셰발라 소바 원비 셰바 남기 수소기 대코나니 통화 주로 네 수소기 대코나니 통화 주래스 미다 나와나야 참마 메세 되시거래 랑원에 주바 통화나 신이나 아니 그 Miki Sheba, Naga Sheba, Nasheba, Sheba, Yigi Sheba, La Soba, Kanga, Samare Duris, Kada Nelu Tadul Samare Duris, Nelu Sama Maris, Meta Nawana, Sama Messet, that is Sheba Nam Susoji, Dekonani, Tomar Jushe, and then Miki Sheba, La Soba, Dekonani, Sama Yinkuela Ase. Then Nazu Sheba Kanga, Dekonani, Nezungonetela. Then Chidar never Taganashi Togiora, and Dekonanero. Then Kate Yoba Nashing as a Togiora. Tagarang as a Tony Nelu Tatu Tore, Takora Nelu Tatu Tare, till a Devaka Yomara. Dekonani the Samet, Dana Chiba Nam Toma Mebane, Mobi Nelu, Chishi Tonshi, Chiba Sosuke Ngaransu, Joa Toma Mebana, Mobana Nelu Tata Tondere, Taga Nesu Tatu Tondere, Taranguni Trubayene, Taranguni Trubanelu. Suda Rachel Sobanganzo Tona Shedendora. You know, as Nelu Tatu Tondonga, your Toma Mebane. Moving Nelu Toma Yishi. Tela Comba in Benin, moving Nelu Tatu Tela Toma Mebane Comdero. Nizeta to Teleshaji Comte Yora. In a taco, your mother, so Comba in Be. The Dang moving Nelu Chishi Shebe Pagwella Manitane. Nelu Tadu Toya Tonda Pagwelam Toya Tondalia, and then Tabache, Sambache, Combache, Tabache to Vega Chedo, Taratoya Chedo, Rabduchung ala Soba, Kawatu, Tazukangamago, Kugumedoser. Moving Nelu Chishinshebe, Pagwelam Soala, Tabache, but Tamebade, Sora. Ah, Tatiba de Silan, Mandrocha, then Dimalo Shantasma. Remember, you did say. Remember, you did say. The Dangane, Shichi Nelu, Chinji Maloba, Chinji Narnerwa, Shichi Nella, Chinji Lodon Zimbe, Loda Numumba, Nam said it, that Chinji Lod Zengi Omara. Chinji Maloba told they were Zengi or Samgura, that Chinji Lodge Lokanga Yoma, Deshera. And again, Nelu Tatu Toase, Tarwatoba that Rishi to Tatsu, and was away. Yamubanam said, Koe Pumbu, Mubuchi Lemba Mebar Koale, Tarwa Chim didn't do it, and Tarwa top there, Timada Tobeke Yomarata, Panja Payake Yomara, as you told it other. Rangune Truba Tayo, any Pasu Rangune Truba Tayo, Rangune Truba, Niora, Teleshakbati and Duty Ora, Rangune Truba Shakba Yora. And Yomopa and Beverett, Tarugana, Tarbato, what you could ask, what people do Chilana, Maudoches.
So again, phenomena, objects appear to ordinary beings, and we cling to them as if they were existent in their own right. So living beings conceive such objects as form and so forth to be established in their own right. And these objects appear to exist in their own right to their visual and other sense consciousnesses. And so if it were the case that these were to really exist in that way, then our consciousnesses would perceive forms and so forth in accord with their actual ontological status. In that case, these consciousnesses perceiving form and so forth to exist in their own right, or to be established by way of their own characteristics, would necessarily be perceptions of what is true. Then forms and so forth existing in their own right would be the ontological status of composite things. And so here, if it were the case that these objects existed in the way that they appear to us, to our sense consciousnesses and our consciousnesses, as though they existed from their own side, and that were the actual way that they existed, then it would be the case that our our sense consciousnesses and so forth being valid would mean being valid with the respect to the final nature of things. Our as was said above with the quotation from the King of Concentration Sutras, where it says that the eyes, ears, nose, and so forth are not valid cognizers. This is referring to their not being valid with respect to perceiving the ontological status or the sort of final nature, the actual nature of things. Because if it were the case that our sense consciousnesses were perfectly valid with respect to the actual nature of things, as in things appear to them to exist in and of themselves by their own characteristics from their own side. And if our sense consciousnesses and so forth were absolutely valid with respect to that, that they were actually able to perceive the ontological status, the real nature of them, and there is no nature then beyond that, then, as it says, our sensory consciousnesses would then perceive the reality of form and so forth. And our sensory consciousnesses would necessarily be valid cognizers of the reality of forms, sound, and the rest. Were this the case, then ordinary persons would have accurately perceived the ontological status of composite things from beginningless time and would have become accustomed to that. So therefore, it would be senseless for them to seek the path of noble beings who accurately know the ontological status of composite things. So if it were the case that that our sense consciousnesses and so forth were valid completely with respect to the nature of various objects, and we see that nature, we directly perceive that nature with our sensory consciousnesses and have been habituated to it since beginningless time, then there would be no reason, it would be senseless for them to seek the path of noble beings who accurately know the ontological status of composite things. These ordinary beings would have already eliminated the afflictions and misconceptions with regard to the ontological status of phenomena and would not need to later appropriate composite things, that is the aggregate of cyclic existence. So if we didn't have any wrong consciousnesses, if it were the case that saying that our sense consciousnesses are valid meant that they were valid with respect to the ontological status or the final nature of phenomena, there would be no need to seek out any sort of higher path, any kind of mental development, because we would be seeing the nature of things. And if it were the case that we were seeing the actual nature of things, and that nature was that they were existent from their own side, objectively existent, then all of our, say, afflictions would also be objectively existent, such that we couldn't ever get rid of them. There would be nothing that we could do to change those things that are existent in their own right or by their own characteristics. And so too, we would have eliminated any sort of afflictions based upon a misperception of the actual nature of phenomena, and would thus already sort of be liberated. You wouldn't have anything to do. So those are the various kind of faults that would come if we were to assert that our sensory consciousnesses are valid, and valid meaning with respect to the ontological status of phenomena.
Oh yeah, that 농대 원래 성구도. 대다야 리버 주주발에 성공불로 주기로. 근데 가르성도서는 지들 집에 딱 와서 집에 소소 경어라 저게 르랑원에 주바 딱와 나신원에 이나시거라. ngöbu gete tenjo nas tona shim temba yena siwara ngöme namdarto tene ngöme namdarto ngöbu tene nyomula soba mebe tarba tobdo rese tambuna kange mende chuchi yuse tarba toba mebe chuchi diyo ma ko ngöbu nelu ngone te tonde yora tana shi tedan dole ja gete wombu te da che ne pagwe lamji sule chishi cha so de Miki ombo na ombo ne ombo la soba yiji ombo la soba kanga chama mares ta la sonrwa oti sonye tanda karesna de kete ombo teda yu rawon to tubal chama yena ne pagbe lam kombal tanda yo marese ne lu tadu tonde yo res kora sheda uma jubal le jas kete jiden chama yena ne sin jiden ba ngazu kyuji miki sheba na sheba la soba ro 그래서 강가 체마 이나 시고라 대든 지된 체마 이나는 지된 등이 통해 파셔지 대 고난일에 체마 이나서 랑원에 주바 통한다도 체마 이나 시고라 어디 개바시고라 The Tamal Kajitu Sana, the Sema Mare, Chidan Sama Mare said to Gura. Titunda Mare, Rawuni Trubato, and Shema Mare, Yena, and Pabelam Kumbala, and I Mare Sogura Resgora. Tebaka said, Sana, Sema Mare, Sema Yena, any Pabelam Kumbala, and I think you didn't Sema Yena, you didn't think it away. You didn't take on it away. You didn't think it away. Passion, Pabelam Shandaji, Kolokoba Maresura. Passion, the Chigu, Pabelam, the Chisha, Lumbu Samaraba minus, Lumbu, you won't be Shebala, Yiji Shebala Sobatida, over around to Trubala, Sama Mayin, with Nelu Tadula, Sama Mayin said that. Yatiba to selection.
So, here, then again, being liberated from cyclic existence, why would they not like it? If we were already sort of had valid cognition of the actual mode of phenomena. And then, as verse 3 of Nagarjuna's 60 stanzas of reasoning states, if things were actually true in accordance with ordinary persons' thoughts. Here, this is referring to, really, it says the sort of childish, those that, like us, perceive things as being existent from their own side, and so forth. If things were really true in accordance with that, then as they would have no things, as in no aggregates, why would they not like their liberation? As in, if you already perceived the sort of nature of things, their mode of abiding, then wouldn't they then already be liberated? Wouldn't they already sort of be happy in that? And so here there's a kind of a misunderstanding. And again, as we saw above in the King of Concentration Sutra, if these sense consciousnesses were valid cognitions, of what use to anyone would the noble being's path be? So if some scholars misunderstand valid as being valid with respect to the sort of final mode of being, that ontological status of phenomena. So they don't know how to distinguish like the kind of valid cognition that is valid with respect to a conventionality versus something that is valid as meaning with respect to its final status or the way that it exists. So here, consciousnesses, according to this system, can be valid cognitions, but not necessarily valid with respect to the way that things are. They're valid, but not in terms of the mode of abiding of phenomena. And so too, Chandrakirti's entering the middle way states, if the cognitions of worldly persons were valid, they would see reality. So what would be the necessity of the noble being's path? What would be the use of their paths? The cognitions of the foolish are not suitable to be valid. So if it were the case that ordinary childish beings, sense consciousnesses and so forth were already valid in the sense of valid with respect to the ultimate mode of abiding of phenomena, then what would be the use of an Arya path in terms of pursuing that kind of higher understanding? So it says, if one asserts that the cognitions of the worldly are valid and that they see reality truly, then one must accept that they have eliminated ignorance. For this reason, the cognitions of the foolish are not suitable to be valid.
Oh, yeah. And the Umajuba Randrelis were the Wataba Umajuba. She started long time so at Randrelis. They take you Randrelis. You didn't say money to care Lambayabada. You didn't be lost somebody. You ran when you trouble Samayina. And Nelu Samarendura. Nelu Tadu Tirendura. Nelu Tadu Samar. And then Yamapan should be back on Mariset. You need to take on a time bitches. Rangune trouble tone Samayina. The Konani Nelu Tadu de Rangune Truba de Reku. Rangune Madruba de Nelu Maribada. Rangune Truba de Kuneta Muneta de Dugora. In a Koran nature Simachishin Tonga de Dugora, and a Nelu Tadu Tonga de Dures. The Kona Tonga in Bessie, Mariba Bamba in Bari. Mariba Bamba Dures, Mariba Yomara, Tonga Gatemba de Dura. Chijilo de Yomara. Mariba Bamba in Bari Dures. 이치 럼보네 세마르바 마이너 이치 럼보 교기 아니 미게 셰바 나베 셰바 미게 왕볼라 소바 이기 셰네스 강이 바티 데버라 박베람 콘도 쉐버셰 박베람 생게지 소소키 올레 데베 박베람 세세 저달라 수dim다 테바다 삼바 콤바체벌스 왔다 메레스 와라 수dim다 테바다 삼바다 콤발라 소바 팀바스 팀베스 슈크쳔부체데 제부도 셰바 많이 바디 제부터 왜게요 말해서 얘네 대다 많이 노 셰소바타로스 엄마 주관래 어디 봐도 지켜나
So here again, sorry, I read a little bit ahead. In Chandrakirti's then explanation of entering the middle way, his auto commentary, he says that if one asserts that the cognitions of the worldly are valid and that they see reality truly, as in a valid cognition is valid with respect to the ultimate final mode of abiding of phenomena, then one must accept that they have eliminated ignorance. If if their consciousnesses are valid in the sense that they are valid with respect to phenomenon's ultimate nature or ontological status, then there's no need to try to eliminate ignorance. Those are valid because they're valid with respect to phenomenons existing from their own side. And again, according to for this reason, the cognitions of the foolish are not suitable to be valid, as in valid with respect to that ultimate nature. Because if the seeing of something and seeing it as being existent from its own side, if that seeing, like, were valid with respect to that mode of abiding, in that, yes, that phenomena did exist from its own side, then there would be no need to pursue any kind of higher paths. So it continues saying, if you say merely that the eyes and so forth ascertain reality, then there would be no need for diligent effort along with its effect with regard to ethical discipline, study, reflection, meditation, and so forth, for the sake of cognizing the noble path. Therefore, that is not true. So here, although again, the eyes, the visual consciousness and so forth can be valid. They are not valid in the sense of ascertaining reality, because then the result would be that there's no need to make an effort to try to realize this noble path.
Oh yeah. 엄마 주발래 장아세 미국 양다 준비 통화에 뭐니 뭐니 좀 버티었어. 아무거 참마서 봐. 뭐부 대다 참마 탐절이야. 준비 통화에 로이 유치다. 아니 양다 버 통화에 로이 유니 요래서라. 미국 양다 준비 통화에 로이 니베 뭐니 요래서 군주다 군주 템바다 템템바니 시오라. 니네 좀 버티었어. 뭐부 컨디션에 코랑 유에 들이야. 양다버 통해 로이 유치다. 준비 통해 로이 유치 니니 진대 요래서 달래내대 요래서 다래. 양다 통해 간데 등이들 양다버 통해 로 동반이 무슨도 또베 로이 유텔이야. 남템바세 그래서래. 양다 통해 간데 대코나니 랑원에 주베 동바들어. 이때 대코나니래 남템바래서라. 통화 준비 군주 템바소세. 준비 통해 로이 통해 그러와. 수트티르를 샬라서 바꾸라테 군수 템바레스 오라 템바 두번 남기 와라 무슨라 나오나시 템바 매네 하고 다시 여대라 군수 템바시 오래셔라 아 군수 템바 소세 시에서보다 뭐부 탐제라 어떤다 가르치고 그랬으나 뭐부 개바 같이 야한테 손수여라 뭐부 코란데 요 말레스 이 동반이래서라 이네 군수 템바든 저기 오마라 군주 때문에 매번 샤도라 이거 말이지 매번에 똑같은 말이지 군주배 오지 요래 단단배 오지 닝고 코란 내줄 요래 뭐니 뭐니는 전부 요식도 뭐 코란 내줄 텐데 닌진제 때 요래서 거라 이들 군주 때문에 거래 양다 버터를 이들 단단 때문에 거래 군주 통해로 이들 군주 때문에 거래 대반이 남샤트를 해서 근데 군주 때 단단 요래서 단단대 요래서 다 거기라 야 되지 주나
So then continuing with a quotation from Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way, it states, all things bear two natures, found by correct and false views. So all phenomena have these two kind of natures, that which is the object of false seeing, and that which is the object of correct seeing. So here, when it comes to then those two, the object of those who see correctly is said to be reality, and the object of those who see falsely is said to be conventional truth, in the sense that all phenomena bear these two sorts of natures, that which is found by the mind, a conventional kind of a mind, and that found by a mind and the object of a mind that sees correctly. So, for example, a mind that perceives emptiness directly, suchness, ultimate reality, that it exists in the way that it appears. So it is referred to as correct seeing, and the object of that is then the ultimate. Whereas the kind of minds, uh, again, so thus all in terms of the apprehending, thus all phenomena have in fact have two natures, ultimate and conventional. In terms of the apprehending consciousness, there are also accordingly two cognitions, valid cognition that realizes the conventional and valid cognition that realizes the ultimate. So there is in this system an understanding that the object so there are some scholars who are sort of like would like to say that emptiness is the only sort of truth, and thereby there is nothing else. There's no way to sort of posit the conventional as having any kind of existence within these sorts of systems. And so here there are, for all objects of knowledge, all phenomena have these two natures. They're not just sort of nothingness or just emptiness, but in the sense there is an ultimate truth, and then there is also a conventional truth. So valid cognitions are of two types, one that realizes the conventional and a valid cognition that realizes the ultimate.
Oh yeah. Shesungpa tarstati chikpada ho tenrepa jara. Shesungpa da ngobo tamze tali ya rangi ngo kunzu bache da dambe temba nyen jingshi nete yore se. Yoba na shi yuje na ya kunzu ba kora sutra churu jala soba tongge lochi da. Tele cheba chene rangu ne truba tonga na shimba imba tongba nye tokbe yuje nyi yore se ore. Yuje na ya tetar kunzu da tondam tokbe chema nyi yoba ye no se. Kaya tenjuwe londi tsemane rangi juyi ji tsoyo chola miluwe rigba shigla jola tenjuwe luli ya tagi labsayimba juyi tsoyo chola miluwa shire mado nawala tsema sheba lawshita zo kanga rangi nawala tsema rete wara kila yena ne ngui sumda sheba penyen che tsema shiwa re che ra kila yena ngui sumche sheba che penyen che lung tsema she shiwa re se song she se 다 뒤는 무슨다 제가 참만이 난도 제송가 발송샤서 어디부터 지도나
Mhm. So, again, then all phenomena have, in fact, these two natures, ultimate and conventional. So you have objects of two types as well. Then you have two types in terms of the apprehending consciousness. There are also accordingly two cognitions, valid cognition that realizes the conventional and valid cognition that realizes the ultimate. So, moreover, as stated above, in this prasangika system, valid cognition is posited as an awareness that is not deceived with respect to its principal object, its object of engagement. So again, even when it comes to something like a wrong consciousness, that wrong consciousness can be valid with respect to the appearing object, but for something to be an actual valid cognition, it needs to be non-deceptive, unmistaken with respect to the principal object, the object of engagement. And then we'll get into the various, with respect to valid cognition, there are four types that they assert, including perceptual cognition, inferential, analogy, and verbal testimony.
어야 Tetaria Shigebe Drebale, Milu Shebane Jidena Semanidu Tonase, Jidena Yako, Milu Achilia Chema Chema Sigdo Asera, Dina Sheni Shungi Kapsako, Semenam Shayore Sungura Shetase. Shetan, Gobulu to Jitsundo Nale Soshasera, Sheba that long Tatin Rosa, Sheba Chemashe, Long Chemashe, Penny Jag Chemashe, Long Chemashe. Shi chema shi yu song swa. Cheba sin nam ju cheba se te cheba ra long chema se long ge ta le tene. Je song ta be long le tene chi po ye sho ra. Pe nye je si du za o pala pa mi se de pala dra bu yo re se ra. Ji chi de di dra bu chi yo ra da se de pe nye je si do. Nye je da cheba long ge tu je da. Cheba che ra ne long ge ko ne tu ye long ge chema. Pe trup chawe pe ko ne pa din rabuchi yore set ngusum gini leta wa ne ngusum chama shi yu se tenju lu la sung go ra cheda chise le ja chama shi le ji den ge tyo do kwa jo ba yin no shi sung ba ta ro se o ti bo.
So then, again, with respect to valid cognition, there in the Prasangika system, you uniquely assert these four types as perceptual cognition, inferential cognition, analogy, and verbal testimony. And Je Tsongkhapa said that in brief, these four can be included within the two types of valid cognition, perceptual and inferential. So in his commentary to the 400 stanzas, Chandrakirti has said, in the world, an undeceived cognition is said to be valid. So here, being non-deceptive is the primary sort of qualifier of a valid cognition. And in Nagarjuna's Dispelling Debates, it says, there are inferential, analogy, verbal testimony, valid cognitions. Inferential proves a point with a correct reason, verbal testimony with citation, analogy with an example. One can respond with these and with perceptual valid cognition. So here, when it comes to the four types of valid cognition, we can have a perceptual direct valid cognition. We can have an inference in terms of proving a point with a reason. Verbal testimony is in citing scripture that is valid. Or we could use an analogy, like this is like that, using an example in order to prove a point, like this is like an oxen or something where you're giving some kind of an example to put forth a kind of understanding. And then one can posit perceptual, direct, valid cognition. And Chandrakirti's clear words also states, one establishes the knowledge of a worldly meaning with the four valid cognitions. So here, this is the way in which the Prasangika system presents then what are the four valid cognitions, or really the two of perceptual and inferential.
Oh yeah. Chema da cheme sheje jo bo te ase. Chema da cheme sheje se de rangwen ne trube chema she rangwen ne trube yu she tin de ni sha go ma de so ra. Chema da cheme sheje jo bo ya pen ju tu ju ge. Ten je de bar jo e sheje chi de le ten ne ti tong ge chema ten shin de pen ju chi chi le tu ne. Sheje de pa jo de ngom bo re de yo na. Sheba de chema re ru ra. Chema de ngom bo yin ba tong go yo sa pa jo de ngom bo yin ba sheje re she chi chi le tu ne tru de ma do. 유튜브 메고서 랑와도 주베 샤마다 샤샤데 샤요 마레스티 샤요라 엘 치르바가 되시기도 그런 최탐정 원이 매시기도 하시나 보게 아주 또그 치드 주주라서 와 근데 남샤 참마 요레세 그런 남샤 가야 제토 마레세라 일리가 렌템도 샤마다 샤샤 요레세 그런 나시 랑고 모두가 랑와도 주베 근데 요 마레 현재 유튜브 땡지 되버리 좀 샤마다 샤샤 요레스 렌자 요라 이 롱도 소리. 다 참마다 샤제 조바티야 펜주 뚜두다. 펜주 때네 샤바 삼비 예베 참마다 샤제 조바 임베야세. 참메 주베 샤샤라 랑게 ngo니 주바치 메고 버송데 참메 주베 샤샤이나 랑게 ngo요 주바치 거레 삼테 꼬마레소라. 직세레 대다게 펜주 때네 주바 유르기에세. Chemada yona sheje tuen yure. Sheje tuen de yona chemada chema shat ure se. Sheje tuen da yona chemada don yuge. Chemada sheje ni ngoni je trubani yoba mai no she son sos. Otibo to chistu.
So,
No.
yeah. This is kind of a continuation of the same meaning that has been that has come above, but as to the presentation of valid cognition and its cognized objects, here this is not as though in this system one posits that there is a kind of a cognized object that exists from its own side. Nor does there exist like a valid a sort of subject that exists from its own side. So here, when it comes to the presentation of valid cognition and its cognized objects, this is done with valid cognitions and cognized objects that exist by being merely posited relative to each other and mutually dependent on each other. It is not necessary for an object that is established by valid cognition to be established by way of its own essence. So here, again, it isn't the case that a valid cognition is something that the subject or the object has that kind of existence from its own side, but they can only be posited interdependently in the sense of mutually dependent upon one another. As Chandrakirti's clear words states, valid cognitions and their cognized objects are established through the force of mutual interdependence. By virtue of the presence of valid cognition, there come to be cognized objects, and by virtue of the presence of cognized objects, there come to be valid cognitions. But there is no intrinsic establishment of either the valid cognitions or the cognized objects. So it is the case that it's necessarily that these two are mutually dependent. You can't have a kind of valid cognition of an object that exists in and of itself from its own side or autonomously, or a kind of subject cognition that is existent from its own side. But they can only be posited by way of mutual interdependence. They're necessarily not established from their own side.
Oh yeah. 신대도 단대 때내 딱 맞으면 샤고를 시시기라. 가시도 신대도 랑게 뭐니지 신대를 맞추지 않았어. 신대이나다 컴퓨터이나다 가리나 다치 버와. 랑게 뭐니지 맞추지 않았어. 미기 시발라 신대 콜로다 미기 받아도 콜로다 밑에 사체 아니 다시 해서 통대도 신대 콜로를 해서 받아오라. 신다 가봐도서 신대 전에 대사 그거라 전에서 이제 차세 강샤로라 신대를 진진세 미리 셰바파 신대 정그래서라 이제 셰베자 미실라 가나와 대다 실소나 어디 신대를 대신대도 와서 신대 대쇼세라 지쇼세라 근데 랍그래서라 이래 강 신대 이미 가르신들의 폴로들의 들의 딱새게 제고 말이셔라 지내 다녀. 이동서 백신들의 신대 대쇼 가지고 요새 랍그레셔라. 대점지 신대 샤거라. 이지 미실라 나와테다 실소네. 네 대달에 강 신대 이 마다 마셔 버세. 지단된 대신들에서 이마이 제바가 요 말아 지내 다녔다도 마셔 반디네 신대 오냠도 딱 봤삼지. 엔텐디 신대레스 나바삼지 아주 미케 이나다 미드로세나다 어디 자와 신경이 신대디 남샤 셰사레스오라 자와 진우지 신대 주주 조반인데 인제 미게 셰바다 이지 셰바니가 신대라 멜로게 참아 조반네 미시게 신대 통고요래 단예 신게되게 신대레 가지고 때나 로고 요새르잖아 아니 미기 셰바다 이기 셰바니가 세마레셔라 때내 딱 봤삼지 샤비어 마도 이내네 치카르에서 센 진리 남셔가 말한 지대 당했다디 어디 보도 시키라
So here, then what follows is it says, take the example of a chariot. Here, this is talking about the kind of way in which things are existent as dependent designations. And so when we take anything, like say, for example, a chariot, we could take any kind of thing like a computer or whatever sort of object we want and say, although it is not established as a chariot by way of its essential nature, due to the appearance of any of its parts, the wheels, chassis, and so forth, to the visual consciousness, we apprehend it as a chariot. So, in dependence upon seeing the various kind of components or parts, we see this aggregation of parts and we say, oh, that's a chariot. And so, independence upon that, we then are able to designate this thing as being a chariot. And so, for worldly conventions, things don't need to exist from their own side. We don't actually need to find anything that exists in the way that it is so designated. So, here, when it comes to then, um, also, our mental consciousness conceives as a basis of imputation whatever appears to the visual consciousness, and from that imputes this is a chariot without any analysis or examination as to what among those parts is a chariot. So, here again, this aggregation of parts appears to us, and we designate, we impute, oh, this is a chariot without examining any or doing any kind of analysis as to what among those parts is a chariot. But rather, this mere imputation suffices as the way to establish that a chariot is able to perform the function of transport. So, even though there is, if we were to like search for within those various parts the thing that is the chariot, we couldn't find something that we could point to. A chariot can still exist, it can still convey people from one place to the other. And that is the extent of the existence of a chariot. So, this mere imputation suffices as the way to establish a chariot that is able to perform the function of transport. Therefore, both the visual consciousness and mental consciousness are posited as valid cognitions that are not deceived with respect to the chariot. So, here, when it comes to the kind of way in which that exists, the visual consciousness, which on the basis of seeing those parts, and then the mental consciousness, which imputes, oh, that's a chariot, are both valid with respect to the chariot, although not, of course, the chariot's ultimate mode of existence.
야, 당신도 탄예도 유주세. 탄예도 유다세. 탄예도 유세다. 더담바 유세니 요라. 탄예도 유세도 니르실 쓰요라 티셰요라. 밀루에 셰바테다는 지단지 탄예라 지단 낭시. 작바다로 주바 인지세. 단다 싱데 탄예 셰게 미기 셰바다 탄예베. 예예 셰바 디디레세. 탄예니 조사. 어때 주세요라. 작바 직대나 작바나 실제 주고요. 그래서라. 대 마침발 직대나 작바나 시 마다 버셔파 차셔실 때는 맹따고 많이 버셔. 지체니 라네 등도셔니 단이 따요 말해서라. 대 마침발세. 마다 마셔봐 단이 따고 대 마침버셔 지체니 아니 데르 말해서 근데 단이 치고요 말해서라. 이 침바시데 나게 드버셔 그래. 대 짬을 샤고 그래서 따라. 마침발 신대 인로 지다리 마셰 신대 인로 지다리 마셰바라 유라 주바 임베세 어때 다시 제바르 제 말에 건지되나 가트라고 쳐셔를 때는 바다가 참 되게 쌈지 드버려와 같이 버셔 그래서라 이 선자 직대배 당에 셰바도 줄 가르스 그래서나 마다 마셰바르 주고 셰바스 그래 마다 마셰바르 주고 셰바스 직대배 탄예배 셰바스 그래 직대 탄예배 셰바 직대지 작바스 그래 직대지 작바 직대는 다가 작바를 다가 차샤 그래서 직대지 작바 실제 세신 대다게 유 신달라 속과 최대다라 직대 탄예 따바나 신다 강바 여러 어느 생동을 속과 민가르다나 대다라 탄예지 왕게 여바스 그래서 탄예 용어 강바 직den기 당연히 원거 여버려 신단 직den기 당연히 원거 여버려 미다 따다 발라서 직den기 당연히 원거 여버려 시거래서 당연히 원거 여바다 똑배 따서 마시거래라 똑배 차셔질 때는 반디레스 라바테 삼지 이마에게 남사 침버셔오라 직den기 이선자 똑배 따서 삼세들면서 똑배 강 따다레시고 말아 그 여당 열로든 직den기 당연히 지다도 똑배 차셔질 때는 반밍 따서나 디레스서나 로디디오 냠서나 왔다가 잠비 디버레스 거라 그래 똑배 따섬 민기 샤섬 와 야 똑배 원게 여봐 시장 소소소 어디부터지
So then we get into how a chariot exists conventionally. So again, there's a conventional level of existence, not talking about the kind of ultimate level of existence. So these undeceived cognitions engage their objects according to how they appear and are upheld in the conventions of the world. They engage their object, such as a chariot, without analyzing its ontological status, without dissatisfaction regarding that. So here, when it comes to the kind of conventional existence of phenomena, the consciousness imputes a name, a designation on a collection of parts, like, oh, that's a chariot, that's a car, whatever it is, without analyzing the ontological status of that, and is merely satisfied with that. So therefore, they are called cognitions that engage without analysis or investigation, or cognitions of worldly conventions and what is upheld by the world, or sort of known by worldly renown. So this kind of, just that designation suffices for existence. It's not, again, and this is why their objects, phenomena such as chariots, are said to exist by the power of convention and so forth, because by mere conceptual imputation and by the power of conceptualization. So, whatever it is, whether we're talking about a chariot or a house or an ox or a human, whatever kind of object it may be, in dependence upon a collection of parts, we have the mind that imputes, that designates, oh, this is a chariot, this is a person, this is an ox, and is satisfied with that, doesn't need to, like, say, find something with among the parts that exists in the way that we think it does, as like that ultimately existent thing. And so it is on the basis of merely designating on a collection of parts that suffices for this level of existence, or in terms of what is upheld by the world or worldly renown. And so the object of such conventional consciousnesses are said to then exist by the power of convention and by mere conceptual imputation and by the power of conceptualization.
오야 하나 더디 말로셔 오늘 지대나 강 작바 남다 똑배 강 딱바 남 여버 줘버리 베서 또 볼라라 근데 지대나 강 작바다 지대 똑배 강 딱바 당에 강 딱바 대 상마탐제 여버리 베서고라 대다 마인데 대 강가요 말으셔라 지대나 작바 이야 르베너나 당에도 여버 줘 말해 당에도 여식 말으셔 그래서 빼난 지대나 nga rangi ngoyo chuba jidena ra nga te rangi ngoyo chuba yora nga sya tarire kedu kashe dinde chigdo nga sa kashe dinde chigdo chi yona shagdo uzu sari yona shagdo nga rangu ne chuba da ngai was ngai se su yoban jidena chagre sibora ngai wa yoba yola se ngai ridi tade ridi ba keba mambu be lo mambu chimbura chito ngeme ridi tanda teyo mara ko yindi teyo mara ngeme bu chunju lo nga chebe de tanda lo chuju tenju le de teyo mara ko yindi teyo mara ngeme ridi sin de ngeme me de saro gwa chimba te ke samutang mara o tende sinati ngonje tade ngonje ridi Jimbar Jimba, Tadane, Jigdana, Traja, Yoba Mahino, so Tiba the Chilam.
So here then someone has the kind of qualm thinking, well, you've said that phenomena just exist by mere conceptual imputation. So can you posit as existent whatever is upheld by the world and whatever is imputed by concept? So here, if it is the kind of question that arises is then therefore does everything that is just merely conceptually imputed existent, or whatever is upheld by the world, is that existent? And so the answer is that no, it is not like that. Although something may be upheld by the world, if it is undermined by reasoning, it is not suitable to be posited as existing even conventionally. For example, in the world, one finds the apprehension of a self that is established by its essential nature and the apprehension of what belongs to that self. So we see that there are various kinds of philosophical schools and so forth that say that there is an I that really exists, whatever it is that they may point to, like this is the I, and this is an existent thing, and it exists by an essential nature and so forth, and therefore the mind and so forth would also exist in that way. And it's not the case that that is existent just because it is posited by someone. Also, there is the apprehension of a prior mountain being the mountain of the present. So, for example, we see a mountain that we have seen before, and we think, oh, yeah, that mountain is still there, but it's not actually the same mountain. It's merely the same continuum, and we mistake those as being the same. Like when we have a 5-year-old kid and they're now 50, it's not as though the 5-year-old is now 50, but rather they have the same continuum. So there are certain things like our apprehension of permanence and so forth, and not understanding the sort of nature of continuums that are renowned within the world or are kind of generally accepted within the world. But it's still not suitable to be posited that those exist conventionally because they can be undermined by reasoning. So therefore, although these are upheld by the world, they do not exist in that way.
おい、あれです。おい、だってさ、
So the time is up for today, so we'll stop there.
Thank you again, Rinpoche, and thank you, Katrina, very much for your skillful translation today. And for those watching online, we hope to see you again next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, and we'll finish with some dedication prayers. May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guratam Andalakam Nirayatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Tujuche Ginla.
Recording stop.